I come at it from a different perspective, and I think quite often some of these founders that have been successful in competitive markets have come that way. There's a lot of issues with the business model, and that's what we're trying to fix. Ultimately, Kostüme is an attempt to try and fix a broken model, which is not just cycling apparel, it's the broader fashion industry model. It's the apparel model. It's the fashion industry. Every piece of apparel we buy belongs in the fashion industry. That model is broken and needs to be fixed. And so I think that's why we're getting different results from other brands. We grew 200% last year without doing any paid ads, any performance marketing. Haven't even done, you can go and search yourself. We've not even done Google keywords. That's how little we've done. It's been completely organic, word of mouth. And it's because we're doing something differently and because we're trying to fix a kind of broader problem.
Welcome to Ride to Success, the podcast that takes you on a learning journey to a more productive, creative, and active life through the power of the bike. I'm your host, Pedro Couto Lopes. You can find me on LinkedIn under my own name. And in the podcast, I explore cycling's global trends, community needs, innovative business strategies, and journeys of remarkable individuals in the world of cycling. Today we are joined by Ed Bartlett, the founder of Kostüme, a brand that is rewriting the rules of cycling apparel. Ed's journey is anything but conventional. He is a lifelong problem solver. With a career spanning industries as diverse as video gaming, music, and fine art, Ed brings a unique perspective to the cycling world, blending creativity with an obsession for innovation. In this episode, Ed takes us behind the scenes of Kostüme, from launching during the pandemic to tackling the deep-rooted waste in the fashion industry. He shares how his experience in the arts inspired Kostüme's distinct identity and why he believes cycling needs a fresh, more inclusive approach. But before we get into the podcast, I have a huge request to ask you. If you like what you listen, please consider giving the podcast a follow. It helps me bring amazing guests, and I'll be forever grateful. Now, let's dive in. Welcome, Ed, to Ride to Success. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Likewise, thanks. I think this is the second time we tried to do this. I think last time was at Ruler, which I had to bow out of at the last minute. So, shame we didn't get to meet physically in person, but this is I'm sure we will at some point.
Very good. Yeah, definitely. I wanted to start with acknowledging that there's an awful lot of work that goes into creating a brand, a vision, a mission, designing the product. How do you want to see the product? What innovations you want to have on the product? Talking about sustainability. It's like you can lose yourself before even you get started. And I want to really get straight into the weeds of how it is to create a business in the cycling apparel sector. What was for you the turning point that made you commit to launching Kostüme?
Yeah, well, actually, do you know what? We were essentially a COVID brand, something where this huge world event had happened. I'd been working on the idea in my head for probably 2 years, maybe 2.5 years before that.
So, right. So it's been incubating for a long period.
That's right. And when COVID happened, when I realized that COVID was likely to be something that didn't just go away overnight, I kind of saw it as an opportunity whereby the world was kind of coming to a standstill, and here was a chance to actually catch up and get something out there during that time and kind of launch, without the world still turning. So it seemed like a perfect opportunity. It was also driven a little bit by the fact that I'd previously been working with artists, and of course, suddenly there were no exhibitions, there were no art fairs. It was very difficult for these people to suddenly have their livelihood, as it was for a lot of people. And so some of the projects I've been working on, some group exhibitions and things, stopped happening. And so it seemed like answering a lot of problems, right? So I, as a cyclist and a consumer myself, wasn't really finding the things that spoke to me as a consumer. I'd been riding an awful lot of Audax, long distance, and you get a lot of time in the saddle, obviously, to think, obsess. And I think if your brain is wired that way, my brain certainly is, I like to solve problems, and I like to think that anything is possible for anyone if you do things in a particular way. And so, so COVID really was the kind of moment where I took all my notes and, my early kind of decks that I'd been putting together and my concepts and kind of went full-blooded into it.
Very good. I mean, that process of having something like that incubation period and, and then there is, this massive change in society happens and it's like, right, let's seize the moment. And I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs that found themselves in the same position as you were. They had an idea, they were working in other jobs, but then suddenly everything came to a crushing halt. And, well, this is the moment, let's seize the moment. And it's interesting that obviously, following the path of an entrepreneur, of a founder, it's very typical that they are a consumer and they find a gap. They find something that they identified, oh, I don't really like the products I'm using. Maybe I can do something better. And that's always the kind of that spark starts them thinking, well, how can I do this? And then they start thinking, like you were saying about, problem solving. And that's a lot how it starts for various entrepreneurs, various founders. But you chose a field, a sector, the cycling apparel market. And it's an interesting one because it has been struggling heavily since COVID. It's really taking a hit. And there is also the aspect that, and correct me if I'm wrong, the cycling apparel market presents itself as perhaps lower entry barrier to entrepreneurs. And this obviously allows people to get into the sector easily, but then it's difficult to make a profit out of it, make a product that really distinguishes itself and differentiates from other products in the market. And I mean, last year, I went to the Bicycling Association conference, and one of the sectors, in this case, cycling apparel, was particularly bad hit by COVID, to the point where it was, I have the statistics here. In terms of sales volume and value was, 8% down from previous years. In terms of volume, and in terms of value was 11% down. So this is also symptomatic of the wider cycling market. It seems to be kind of fluctuating, but it's been in downwards path. But you seem to have that entrepreneurial spark, and you seem to have done something different. And I want you to kind of explain that a bit more, because you say you want to challenge the status quo. But how do you do that? What made you believe that there was room in such a competitive market for a new player like you to come in and really want to make a stand for yourself, for the brand? Talk me through that process, and what has been the journey like so far?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there because there's so many points, right? So I think there's a few different angles to it. I think firstly, I always like to say there's a low barrier to entry, but there's a high barrier to success, right? So we've found a situation now where it's relatively easy for someone to go out to a very reputable factory. They already have the patterns and the blanks ready to go, and you can choose your style of graphics, put your brand on it, market it in a creative way, and you've got a brand. I wouldn't say it's overnight, but certainly the barrier to entry is very low. And so there are a lot of people out there who are very creative and ride in a community, and have some ideas, or they're designers themselves, or whatever it is. And it seems like a relatively straightforward thing to do, to come out and create a successful brand, right? The reality is it's not at all. It's so hard. And actually, a lot of people, I don't think, really take the time to understand that to make a mark in a competitive market like this, you not only have to differentiate, you have to be really solving a consumer's pain points, right? There has to be like a real reason for them to choose your product. So that's the first thing. And I think one of the key things is, I think the fact that Kostüme wasn't an opportunity. So it started because of COVID, right? It would have eventually started because I was already been working on it for 2 years. It would have taken a little bit longer because I needed that kind of moment of inertia to be like, right, okay, this is the time. But it would have happened. And I think so it's not an opportunist brand in the sense of it came about because of COVID and the boom that was happening and more people cycling. It was already underway, and it was already trying to solve some big problems that predate that. So there's a lot of kind of talk in the industry about these Instagram brands that have come out post-COVID. And as you say, there are so many of them. And I'm certainly, it's not for me to talk. I don't know what drives us founders. I don't know any of them personally. So it's certainly never for me to talk in a derogatory manner around their motivations and their aims and goals. But certainly I don't see anything different out there. It's just, a nice passion project. And, that's all it's likely to ever be. I think the ability to now have a breakout brand of the scale of a Raphael or a Pas Normal or a MAP is difficult. And as you say, not only have we seen the market go down in the last few years, we've also seen some really big name brands either posting huge losses or completely shuttering their doors, which is a shame, but it's a rebalancing. And I think my first career was in video games. So I used to be a video game developer for about 15 years in the very early stage of the business. There's lots of similarities, very insular, very inward looking. There's a lot of inspiration being taken. There's very little actual innovation going on. People aren't very good at kind of looking outside of the market at the real problem and bringing external people in to help fix it. And I see a lot of similarities with that, with cycling and cycling apparel in particular. So I think I come at it because I'm actually a downhiller originally. I'm not a lifelong dyed in the wool Tour de France, Spring Classics, obsessive, and so I come at it from a different perspective. And I think quite often some of these founders that have been successful in competitive markets have come that way. They have a passion about something, but they're not from that world, and they're able to look at it and go, well, this is crazy. This isn't working. That I was saying of the definition of madness is repeating the same thing again and again and expecting different results. And I think a lot of cycling brands and cycling apparel brands, that's what they've been doing. And I think, I don't want to turn this into a long rambling answer. There's a lot of issues with the business model, and that's what we're trying to fix, right? Like at the crux of it, yes, we're trying to make the best possible apparel. We can get into all of that. Ultimately, what Kostüme is an attempt to try and fix a broken model, which is not just cycling apparel, it's the broader fashion industry model. It's the apparel model globally, and I think people, they slice cycling apparel and look at it as though it's its own thing. It's the fashion industry. They're all, everything, every piece of apparel we buy belongs in the fashion industry. That model is broken and needs to be fixed. And so I think that's why we're getting different results from other brands. I think that's why, you talk about the negative things. We grew 200% last year without doing any paid ads, any performance marketing. Haven't even done, you can go and search yourself. We've not even done Google keywords. That's how little we've done. It's been completely organic, word of mouth. And it's because we're doing something differently and because we're trying to fix a kind of broader problem. The byproduct of that is that we're making exceptional products because we're spending so much more on our products because we don't have that built-in waste that other brands have. But that's a byproduct. Our product and what's helping is a byproduct of the thing we're trying to solve.
There's a few points that I want to kind of break apart there. The first one is the competitive market in itself. How are you cutting through the noise in terms of, you mentioned about the product being you mentioned being a brand where the product leads, the innovation of the product leads. So how is this different from, in your opinion, from what other cycling apparel brands are doing?
Yeah, well, there's two different angles, right? There's the product features and functionality and everything else. And then there's the kind of, a lot of brands are basically making things to a very tight budget, right? So they're making it to a margin. Yeah. The difference with our model is that we can almost design the ideal product and then sell it because we've got so much extra margin, by cutting all of that waste. And if people may not know what we do and how we work, but when I talk about waste, I'm not talking about material waste. That's part of it. What I'm talking about is the margin loss, essentially, that most brands, all fashion, really go through. So we're talking about the big problem in the industry in the last few years has been overstocking, right? So there's been this huge glut, and this isn't just in cycling apparel, this is in the fashion industry, this huge oversupply issue where people are then left with huge amounts of stock they can't sell, they're having to discount massively. Yeah. Stock actually ends up unsold, destroyed, landfilled, sent to kind of foreign countries to be dealt with on someone else's watch. There's a whole other podcast there about that process. But what all of that does is it erodes the margin. So if you're a brand out there, you're making your product, you've got to factor all of that into the price of the product, right? So potentially you're never buying the best version that a product could be in that model because of that built-in waste. If you can remove all of that waste, so our pre-order model, we only make what we've sold, right? So there's no overstock, there's no discounting, there's no unsold stock at the end of the day. We have no returns because we have a wait list. So if products do get returned for sizing reasons, whatever, we've got someone on the list. So we have basically no returns. That's like typically 10, 20, 30% for a lot of brands. And a lot of those returns never get resold. Ultimately, you've got a lot more money at the start of it to spend on the product. And that means more R&D, more kind of innovation, more time to test different things in different ways. We're not the first brand to have a drop seat on our bibs, but it's certainly, in my opinion, and the opinion of reviewers and customers, the best one, because we spend an awful lot of time refining it. We've invented new ways of doing things. For example, our seamless leg gripper, normally that comes pre-printed on the fabric roll, right? And so then when you're cutting the kind of smaller sizes, you end up with all that headroom of waste. So not only are we repurposing that waste onto other products, we're also now printing our gripper after we've cut the pattern, which means basically zero. We're getting more out of the rolls. Most brands, unfortunately, right now don't have the margin to do those things. And so it means that innovation suffers. It means that product quality suffers. It means that, things are always on discount. And the problem is it's a race to the bottom and everyone ends up losing. The consumer loses because of the product quality. The brand loses because of the erosion of trust and their brand image. And so we're essentially not just fixing the waste problem from the fabric perspective, we're fixing the waste problem from the business perspective. And that then allows us to make much better products. And then there's a slightly different answer, which is then, how do you make different products? And so, if you look at our jersey, for example, we've got the extra pockets on the back, for example. That's not an easy thing to do. It takes a lot of work to stop the sagging and make the materials work. So, we're using a fabric on the back that stretches one way but not the other, so on and so on. But I think it's about looking at how people are riding now. And a lot of it comes down to the marketing cycle. And this comes back to the inward looking nature of the industry and the parallels with the video game industry and how they used to get their products. And there's just been this obsession with racing, suffering, performance, Tour de France, saving a few watts or saving, the volume of people that actually ride their bike like that is so small and has changed so dramatically in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, certainly since COVID. And coming at it as an outsider, as a downhiller, and someone looking at it with a completely fresh pair of eyes without that legacy thing of, it needs to have 3 pockets or it needs to have, drag coefficient fabric or whatever it is. Like, those things are all great and they are important and they have their place. But it's looking at it with a fresh pair of eyes and saying, how are people riding their bikes today? What do they need to make it? The problem I'm really trying to solve with the product is to make it as easy as possible for people to just ride their bikes. Because I know from the last 12 months as a founder, really struggling with my own, life balance, and me trying to get out on my bike when I'm really stressed and overworked. It's such a hard thing to do. So even simple things like our arm warmers have the front left, front right on the reflective tag on the arms, because the amount of times I put the wrong arm warmer on, and it's just removing these barriers to entry. And other brands don't seem to be thinking as much that way. They're still focused on the suffering and the racing and making it as aerodynamic as possible. And that's just a marketing story, I'm afraid. There are people that need those products and that benefit from it. But personally, from the people I ride with and from the bigger community that I look at and the way that the market is going and what people tell me about what they want and how they ride their bikes, it's just not, it's certainly not where Kostüme's head is at.
It's there is a lot of truth to what he said in terms of sustainability credentials, how the life cycle of products that is too fast leads to overstock. With cycling being quite a niche sport, and you mentioned as well, not like that word of mouth was kind of your primary channel, marketing channel, let's call it. How do you go about creating something that stands out in oversaturated and almost stagnant industry? Because you can make an awesome product that other people that use it see, wow, this is amazing, there's nothing like this before. But how do you communicate this? How do you really reach other people? Because word of mouth, yes, it's a great way of spreading news. It works like a snowball. It's going downhill. It just starts gaining momentum, starts gaining volume. But is it enough? How do you really cut through this really oversaturated market?
Yeah, I mean, that's the going question, right? I mean, if there was a way of bottling that, it would be, we'd all be, yeah, whoever managed to bottle that would be rich, right? Building a brand is like the hardest thing. I've always been obsessed with brands. I started my first clothing brand in art college when I was 17. I've always just been obsessed with like that question, how do you create this thing from nothing and get people to buy into it in such a way that they obsess about it? I mean, I get people writing me paragraphs and paragraph emails about the holiday they just went on and the kit and what it did and sending me photos. That's the level of engagement we currently have. I mean, I don't expect that to be able to scale. It's impossible, right? But at the moment, people are really, our email open rate's like between 70 to 75%, which is, pretty unheard of. People are really engaged with it. Could I tell you exactly how I've done that? Probably not, no, because there's a certain amount of magic's not the right word. It sounds a bit pretentious. You know what I mean? It's hard to pin down exactly what it is. If you want to know what the kind of key points were, I think there's a saying of like, people will come for the product, right? If you make the best product, your people will find you. And I think that there's been a real obsession in the last few years, 10 years, with performance marketing. And if I spend this, then this will happen, right? And that's obviously reached a point now where that's become unsustainable. Like the cost of acquisition of brands is just absurd. And, we're almost going back to the old fashioned way of building brands, which is much more about image and awareness, above the line. And that's the approach I've taken with Kostüme. And I think integrity is something that is able to be communicated just through how you carry yourself as a brand, right? Your communications, how you write, how you engage with people. But a lot of it's about being true to your word. And so many brands that I look at, not just in cycling apparel generally, are not true to their word. And I think when we say, this is how it works, when it's sold out, it's gone, we don't discount, all those things, it's easy to say those things, but quite often commercially, you then have to change your track. And I have not done with Kostüme. I haven't done any quick wins. There were a lot of low-hanging fruit things that I've turned down so as not to step away from my values for the brand and the brand's values as an individual. I always look at brands as being like a person, right? The whole branding thing, personality, language, style, how you carry yourself. And
that's a good point,
yeah, I have my own values, but I don't necessarily share all of those with Kostüme. Kostüme, in my view, is its own being, and I think it's important to look at it in that way. So
how does it? Sorry to interject. You mentioned an interesting topic, and from a branding perspective, is quite critical for a brand, the values, the mission, the vision that it has to encapsulate a personality. What would you say is the personality of Kostüme?
Wow, that's a question. I mean, it's still developing, right? We're still quite a young brand, but there are a lot of me, my values, and my personality in the brand for sure. I think there's an activist element to it, and that's something that I haven't really fully started to push yet, because I think you have to be careful in terms of how you educate people, how you communicate. You don't want people to feel bad about their life choices, for example, with sustainability. Point is going out and saying you're a terrible person for buying these products, because ultimately it's the brands that need to change, not the consumer. Of course, the consumer needs to change their habits, but that needs to be led by the brands, right? So there's an activist element. There's a real sense of like wanting to be someone that leaves a positive mark on the planet. Creative element as well. I think that cycling is like an incredibly creative thing to do as an individual. I think, if it's a lot of people cycle on their own. And I think when you go out on your bike on your own, it's such a pure creative act, right? You can choose to ride where you want, ride how you want, fast as you want, stop, start, take photos, do a little video shoot. There's so many ways of riding your bike, and that kind of pure freedom that it entails. So I think there's a certain amount of that creativity in there. And then there's also the perfectionist. So, nothing goes out of the door without it being perfect in my view. And, if that means spending another 6 months, we didn't manage to get our insulated range out for winter because it's just not quite perfect, right? It's fantastic. And we use it again, a bit like the bib shorts, we're using one-off fabrics. There's a fabric that's like €100 a meter. It's a soft shell fabric that's just mind-blowingly good. But it's just not quite ready. And I'm not going to release it yet because I'm not forced by our business model to do that like other brands. I can wait now till next winter because I'm not taking that same upfront risk of having to create this huge amount of stock that then may or may not sell. So yeah, I think those are the kind of key elements of the brand. And I think there will be other ones that develop over time. The idea behind the brand really was to be a bit like a White Cube gallery. Okay. So if you think about what, like Gagosian or like anyone that has an interest in art, the galleries obviously have a strong brand, right? By nature. But actually what they need to do is let the collaborators and the art breathe. If the brands were too strong and too defined as a gallery, it would dominate what it's meant to be doing, which is allowing this kind of amazing art and artists and changing the kind of narrative. The reason the walls are all white is that you come in and you're able to create a different feeling each time. And the costume brand is essentially meant to be like that. So the idea is that there's a strong underlying brand where you understand their values and what it stands for, and that it's quality and what it means to you to engage with it. But actually the product launches, these edits that we do, and especially the collaborations that we do, the aim is that actually they're going to drive a different narrative each time. So actually,
interesting.
We're a bit of a chameleon in some ways, and we've not had the budget so far to really express that in its fullest way, because we're just bootstrapped, and it takes a lot of time, and the focus is on the other things, the product and everything else. But this year and next year, we're going to really start playing with that a lot more in terms of like activations and events, physical events, those sorts of things that are going to be, and also what we do with our e-commerce platform, like being able to kind of really tailor each one with a microsite and make it more like a shop window. I see that kind of that aspect of the brand as being like super important and a differentiator.
I mean, that's very interesting because it makes me think about brands like Supreme that create that cult following, people really diehard fans, and every drop, every collaboration with an artist is like as people lining up outside the door.
They were one of my original brand pillars. So when I talked about pre-COVID, I'd done these decks of like what it might look like, and I'd done the little like this is what the brand might be. They were one of my brand pillars. So although obviously we're not like them in a lot of other ways, and I've never bought anything from Supreme, I'm fascinated by the brand and what they've done. In that world, I come a lot from the street art background, and people like Kai and Sunny, which was already one artist, like they're also linked to those kind of worlds. So I'm very interested in it. I'm not a customer of it, but it's a great example to use. And there were definitely parallels with the idea of what I was trying to do with the brand.
Well, and this is what creates is like the fear of missing out, FOMO, because you choose when the pre-order window opens, when you have a small batch ready to go on sale. And kind of this approach then really defines how people identify themselves with a brand. You mentioned activations, events. This is then, that then goes on to how these events are going to be run. Are they going to be run as in a selective way? If you are in a know, and then it creates a very kind of almost kind of cult following.
I could see that word forming in your brain then.
I mean, this is the model itself. You mentioned this is one of the brand pillars or pillar brands that you have looked at, and it's something that sets you apart from other brands that have to create pre-orders in advance without knowing. They can forecast what the sales will be, but they don't have the numbers. But you reverse that process. And is this something that is because of you managing cash flow? Is this like done purposely so that it creates anticipation, builds momentum? Is this something that is going to be remaining in 5 and 10 years for the brand? Because it's easy as and starting out, 1, 2 years, 3 years down the journey as starting the company to do this and like start small. But when you start scaling up, does it going to change? Or, I mean, do you even want to scale up? Because you can't just be just a small brand and that's it. You're happy with it. But so what I'm trying to get at, what are your ambitions with this?
It's a very good point. Yeah. I mean, that whole question, right? Like people just assume that these companies want to do that, want to scale and become these big brands and sell out to private equity, Yeah, it's a good question. And I think there's a lot of different angles to look at. I think, ultimately you don't create systemic change without scale. So the idea, the goal of Kostüme really is to kind of prove without any doubt that there's a better way to make apparel. Forget cycling apparel, the industry, right? It's like, here is a better way that fixes these problems that you're having. It works. This is how to do it. And to force brands to change their ways, to be competitive, but to be so successful that people have got to change. I like to say that it's impossible to compete with our approach, right? And it is. It's impossible unless you're doing it in the same way. Pick a brand. It doesn't matter which brand you choose. It's impossible for them to make our bib shorts at those price and make that margin, get those reviews and do those things. Okay. And that's not just about, I'm a great product developer or designer. It's about the model. It's about what it enables. So it doesn't matter who does it. And so to be able to be a brand that proves this model works and scales and does all the things it needs to do in terms of stopping the waste, being, up to 50% more sustainable, spending 2 to 3 times more on the product, these are big claims. This isn't, the old Dave Brailsford, approach. This is orders of magnitude, step change in how we make and consume apparel. And longer term, if you're saying what the aim of the brand is, it gives us the margin then to be able to really focus on new initiatives in circularity, for example. So this year, we're about to introduce not just a repair program, but also a take-back program and an upcycling program. We're not the first brand to do that by any step, but we're certainly doing it a lot earlier in our life cycle than another brand would normally do, right? So the innovation isn't just about product, it's about circularity. It's about trying to prove that. And so you can't do that without a certain amount of scale. So yes, there is definitely the plan to scale the brand, but for perhaps different reasons. What was the other question? You asked a question just prior to that as well. I forgot.
It's about I asked about the sales model.
Yes.
If it's, I mentioned,
yeah.
Because as a small brand, that's kind of a very safe way of doing business.
It's certainly not the easy way. I think on my LinkedIn, I changed it recently to doing things the right way, not the easy way, because it's not an easy way to do it. It's really, really difficult and learned a lot of lessons along the way. So I'm certainly not going out there saying to people, here's this great model, it works, it's easy, let's do it, because there are a lot of challenges, supply chain, minimum order quantities, finding the right people. There are a lot of challenges. And I think, building that initial reach, it's a chicken and egg situation, right? You need those pre-orders to be successful with a drop. How do you do that the first few times when you've got no audience and no marketing and no brand awareness? It's really hard. But also pivoting to that model when you're already a wholesale brand is also practically impossible, because you've already educated your consumers. People already understand what your brand stands for and how your model works. So it's not an easy thing to do by any step. I think the other thing is, and this comes back to your point about Supreme, we're not exclusive in a way that, again, I won't name names, certain other brands are. It's not about the highest price. Yes, we might have the highest quality, and I stand by the fact that we have the best quality in the business, because I know who our factory also makes for, and I know we're using better fabrics and spending more money on our products. So I know that we're keeping the prices as low as possible, right? So £180 for our bib shorts is still a lot of money, but actually, if you look at our direct competitors, it's a lot cheaper. We're talking 240, 250, 260, and yet we're spending double at least on our product spec. So even if you're buying that product at 50% discount, is it actually good value? So anyway, there's also all other questions. But my point being that we're not setting out to kind of create that cultish brand where you have to spend a certain amount. You have to be of this status. Anyone pretty much can buy our products. It's limited purely by availability. So we have 350 per batch at the moment. And so that FOMO piece is really around, are you one of those 350 people in the world that like this particular artist collaboration or this design, or needs that particular piece at this time, or wants to experience that quality? And, we've had some people that have bought 4 pairs of bibs in one batch to put all of their other bib shorts out of rotation, So when you start...
but that is a design of the process. If you create that much limited quantities, people will rush to buy it.
To say we did very nearly with our not the cargo bib launch, but the I think it was the autumn bib short launch. We very nearly sold out the batch on the wait list. So it very nearly didn't even go live to customers on the website. We had to, because people can kind of email and go on a wait list for certain products. It very nearly sold out before it actually technically launched. So, we're going to have some things that we need to look at in the future in terms of refining the model and maybe making slightly more or experimenting with those different things. But at the moment, it feels like the right number in terms of like avoiding that overproduction, avoiding that huge scale.
Okay, so I wanted to pick it up on a few things you mentioned. I mean, nowadays, especially younger consumers, Gen Z, they are looking at more of the sustainability credentials of brands, and they are looking at that to inform their purchasing decisions. Sustainability has been kind of a tagline for many brands. You mentioned the fashion industry that is riddled with problems, and really creating a circular economy where you can reuse the products. It's the technology, the cost involved in that is not at the reach of many people or the desires of many brands. So, how do you see as an industry, from your perspective, how does costume fit into this discussion? Because you put a stake firm in the ground saying we are better than other brands in how sustainable we are. Now, how do you see these evolving? How can you back this up when you are telling the story of costume? And, are you actively, as just a brand play, I'm positioning myself against these brands. Look at me. I have different approach.
Yeah. It's really the kind of the driving force behind everything we do, right? So that's the problem we're trying to solve. And so it's not a marketing play. And actually, I don't talk about it enough because I know that consumers are so tired of greenwash. And so I've been very careful not to ram it down people's throats, basically. Like there's a page on our website that talks about, what we're doing and how we're doing it. And, we always hint about the difference in our communications, but we never force it on people because people, I think the problem we've got right now is that there's been so much greenwash, but also that the numbers involved are so big that people just can't take it on board. It's too much. It's too big a problem. People don't feel like their lifestyle can make any changes. And so why am I going to sacrifice things when I don't really believe it's going to make a big difference, right? If you actually take a moment to look at some of the stats, you can see where the problems can be fixed in an easier way, right? So the overstocking, right? That's our main play, right? We're doing pre-order. We only make so there's no overstocking, there's no waste. I think I saw a stat somewhere that was like an estimate of, and this is the other thing, getting real data is very hard because a lot of these really big brands that massively overstock, they won't release their figures. But the rough numbers that get used in the sector are something like 40% clothing that gets made never even gets sold. It ends up just being destroyed, Wow,
that's so crazy numbers.
There's a 40% saving. If all brands are able to forecast better, do more pre-order, deal with that overstocking issue, not only would they fix the margin loss and the discounting, there's a lot of other reasons that discounting is very damaging to brands and to the ecosystem, but that's almost this kind of side problem. But just when you see what goes into making one product, the thought of it being wasted on the very rare occasion where a pair of our shorts gets damaged or goes missing in the post, it breaks my heart because I know what goes into making that one product. Manufacturing, the fabric, the design, the shipping, the packaging, the logistics. When you look at the scale that other brands are kind of overproducing and knowing full well that those things, it's better for a brand to produce too much and not sell it than it is to not be able to fulfill an order and by having the stock available. And this is the problem. The model is based upon pure capitalism, which drives people to overproduce and to have that scale. The scale is almost necessary. It incentivizes that approach, right? And that's completely broken. And so I think I don't really use the word sustainable now. I say responsible because I think sustainable has almost lost its power, right? And so we were able to fix just that overstocking piece. There's 40% saved. That's without going into then the fabrics and the circularity, like the take back and the upcycling. 1% of clothing gets upcycled back into new clothing. 1%. The percentage that then gets landfilled or burned it's crazy. And I think customers need to understand that their choices can make a difference. And they really, as an individual, everything that's happening in the market is based, as a capitalist market, is being based upon demand. And so if that demand changes, it will stop happening. It's that simple. And so I think purely by being able to be out there now with Kostüme, showing the benefits of this model, and people really starting to understand, and this is where I think the word of mouth is coming from. It's not just that it's a great product. I think people are really starting to now understand and see in a tangible way what the difference is. The problem with these big numbers is they're not tangible to us. You can't possibly imagine what all of this waste in the landfill looks like.
Yeah.
You look at photos, but even that doesn't really. I'm sure if you went there in person, you'd be like, oh wow, this is visceral now. So by being able to say, here's a product that you as a consumer can see, and you can, this is me saying this, you can read our Trustpilot, for example. These are the best bib shorts. I've used every brand. These are so much better. But you've only paid £180 for them, and the brand is also saying X, Y, and Z about why it's better. People starting to understand that more now. And I think as an industry, we need to be making things more visceral. We need to be showing the consumers why this is better, not just giving them numbers and saying this is the things we're doing. Show them why it's better. And that has a much bigger impact on people's behavior and their attitudes.
I mean, building up on that, what you just said, I mean, where do you see the industry? Where do you see the cycling industry heading in 5 years?
Yeah, another one I'd like to have a crystal ball for.
Wouldn't everyone?
Yeah, what we're going through right now is again, it's a rebalancing, right? And again, I come back to the video game industry. We have the same thing with this huge boom, and obviously with the consoles, you have this weird built-in life cycle where there's a peaks and troughs and everything. And so I went through quite a lot of rebalancings in my 15 years in the games industry, and then also following it since then as someone been heavily involved with it. And I think cycling is similar. I see so much doom and gloom. I've been talking to investors for the last 12, 18 months, and that negativity is really being felt, and I think that the cycling industry hasn't helped itself in terms of really, of course, we're going to talk about the negatives and we're going to focus on I think there's been too much focus and negatives and navel gazing and not enough positivity. Now, there are still incredible success stories in the cycling world, and those people, that valuable demographic within cycling hasn't disappeared. They're still riding their bikes. They're still spending. We've just seen a rebalancing, and that's true across all consumer goods. It's not just in the cycling world. The consumer space, because of the macroeconomic issues and supply chain issues and so on, it's a problem, but it's a rebalancing. And what generally happens is the cream floats to the surface. In most cases, not always. There are always some unfortunate people that get caught at a bad time or cash flow or whatever it is. So that's not always true. And then it's certainly not derogatory comment towards anyone that has been caught out in that way, because I've been there and I know what it feels like. But in general, the cream floats to the surface. And what will happen is that we'll come back to a level playing field, and then hopefully those brands will learn from the overstocking and the things that got them into this place in the first place. I think there's a cautionary tale of people not investing when things are good. And what frustrates me most, both as a brand owner and as a consumer, is that those people who were doing exceptionally well during the boom weren't using that money. They thought that was going to just continue happening. They thought that growth curve, that once in a generation, once in a lifetime event that caused this big growth, was just going to keep happening. And they didn't invest when they should have. And whether that's accessibility, whether that's women's cycling, whether that's, product innovation, whether it's circularity, whether it's all of those things, when you're in the good times, you should be investing in those things. And the brands that have done that, they are the ones that will ride the storm better. So,
of course.
So I think what we'll hopefully see is a bit more caution moving forwards, and I hope that we'll start to see, a bit more work on not just taking each other's slices of pie, but growing the overall industry. And I think then there will be more initiatives in the next few years, I hope, that will help to kind of make it not feel like this weird little niche that some people look at it as being, because actually it's not. So many people cycle. People may not talk about it in the same way that people like you and I that are super passionate about it or in the industry do. But there is a way to get those people, and actually things like this podcasts are a fantastic entry point. There was someone else the other day I read about who had, really done a great job of enticing more people to kind of get more into cycling from a technical standpoint. But the entry point was actually talking about something much more initially accessible. And I think we'll see brands hopefully doing a lot more. And one of the ways of doing that, I think, is to stop making it so exclusive, but also stop with this message of perfectionism and affluence. And I think it's really important for people to have big goals and to, what we launched the Can Do platform recently, which is an attempt to kind of put across more accessible stories about everyday cycling people. And I think one of the things is aspiration is great, but it's gotten to the stage now where even some of the elite athletes I talk to feel like their efforts aren't good enough because of the marketing, because now you've got influencers out there putting these impossible, and that's what cycling, that's the image that a lot of people have about cycling. It's this like
aspirational thing, aspirational visuals.
The aspiration's just gotten out of control, really, and it doesn't reflect what everyone, every mass market wants from their lifestyle choice.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to reflect on this because, definitely there is, when you look at how cycling apparel is portrayed in marketing campaigns, it does. Some of it, not all of it, obviously. Some of it feels quite untangible. It feels very aspirational. Feels just, maybe that's what they are trying to communicate, like being exclusive. But you look at it like, how? I don't relate to that. I mean, I like riding bikes, but I don't relate to that at all. What you in Kostüme is trying to do is different from brand X and brand Y. And then, this customer segments can overlap, but from what you've been telling me, it's very clear that you want the brand to feel approachable, to be able to have elements that are relatable, that are conscious and responsible in the way it deals with the production cycle and how it portrays cycling, riding bikes. And that is your positioning, which differs from many brands that are at the price bracket that higher than you are in terms of the way you. I can't corroborate this information because I don't have the insider knowledge, but this is what I can extrapolate from this conversation. But also there's an element, and that I feel particularly interested in finding out a bit more, mainly because of my background in the arts as well. You can see the back in my background, one of my artworks. And you mentioned a lot about art and being kind of guided, being inspired. You mentioned about the artists' collaborations that you have in the Pipeworks, but also the ones that you've already done. So I wanted to kind of understand a bit more. How does art, creative expression, fits into the DNA of Kostüme? And now, really, because you have a background in video games, you have a background in music, you have a background in the arts world. It's very rich and very diverse. And kind of I'm trying to understand, like you mentioned, the personality of the brand is really still very rooted in the founder, yourself, as it should be. So how do you approach this kind of the art DNA that seems to be ingrained in the brand and into the aesthetic of how it looks, into the collaborative approach that you have as well? Just talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, as I said earlier, like the whole launch pad for the brand really was, COVID and the artists I've been working with not being able to suddenly, do their thing commercially anyway. Obviously we're not the first brand to work with artists, even in the cycling apparel space. There are many that have it also deep in their DNA. For me personally, I think one of the things I really wanted to do was to not just to be about putting an artist's artwork on the apparel. And obviously it also ties in nicely with our limited model rights. If you think about a lot of these artists do print edition, it's like an edition of 50 or 100, ours is the same essentially. So we have very specific criteria with the artists in that,
Mm-hmm.
we commission the paint, the artwork, we own the artwork, physical. This is the actual painting from Edit One. It's a real painting.
Yeah.
We do the print edition, and they have we're only allowed to produce the amount that the 350 basically. So that sells out and it's really successful. We can't then suddenly, and this comes back to the kind of the virtual contract I mentioned about with our consumers, where they have to build that trust in you. If you're one of the 350 people to buy that jersey, you need to know that we're not going to suddenly go, oh, this has been successful, let's do another 350, because it dilutes what you're, so we've been very careful to have that rigor, and rigor is a really important thing in the art world, as you'll know. The very best artists, you can dissect what they do from any angle and whichever way you look at it, and it has rigor and it stands up to scrutiny. And that's the parallels between costume and the gallery and contemporary art world, right? We have that rigor, and we're trying to have that rigor. From the artwork perspective, one of the problems I was trying to solve was, as a cyclist and a kind of very passionate consumer and cyclist, that thing of not finding the things I liked in the market, right? So there were some that were quite good quality and there's some that were, nice, but nothing really spoke to me personally. And it either seemed to fall between being very bland and plain and, the usual block colors and pastels or whatever, or really out there, like really so much so that I wouldn't actually want to wear it personally. And I know people do buy them. Some of the brands are very successful. They have a really core following because they're so wild and out there.
Yeah.
I really wanted something that was just unique. You're not going to see it everywhere. You can turn up to a ride and be pretty sure someone else is going to be wearing it. And that was the idea with the kind of the apparel. But bigger picture, what I really want is for each one of these launches to be about the artist. So I think I mentioned earlier in the podcast about costume being like the gallery. And, when these galleries put on these shows, the space becomes about the artist. And it becomes, feeling and embodying their practice and their work and who they are. And again, I haven't had the budget to fully do this yet. I think probably actually our original launch, Edit One, was the best example. So the idea for each launch is essentially that we will collaborate with other really good content creators. And that could be not just virtual content, not just film and music, could be physical, could be anything. And to get them to then be inspired by and use the artwork that's been created and the artist, and sometimes even collaborate with them to create the content that sits around the product launch. And so for Edit One, for example, I worked with the guy that does all of the amazing light painting. And actually, if you look at the Edit One drop on the website, you start to get a sense of where we might go with this. But so he came in and we did the original photo shoot using his kind of light painting, which is very visually similar to this. It's got the same sense of flow and the colors. I also then gave the painting to an electronic music artist called Surgeon's Girl, who's actually since that time has really blown up, which is obviously fantastic. Something that I also tried to do in my art brand Future Tense. It was always about trying to find and nurture the next. It wasn't just about working with Damien Hirst, which I have done. It was about finding those new people and helping them to elevate and being part of that story. And so we worked with her and I gave her the painting and said, right, here, create a piece of music that is evoked from the feeling you get from looking at this painting, which she did. And we then used that music in the short film that we used about the light painting to promote the launch. So there's this like narrative, this like tying together of all these different facets that stem from the artist collaboration. That's all the key point. And so it's not just about having some nice limited edition graphics on the jersey. It has a much bigger play. And again, having been bootstrapped and, building this very kind of meticulously and slowly, I've not been able to really fully explore that yet. Like with the cargo bib launch, wasn't an artist collab. That was our own launch. And so what we did is we did a short film. We went on a bike packing trip with someone that's in our kind of community that we liked his story. We went there with him. We lived that experience with him and then made a short film about it, did an interview. That then was the launch of the Can Do platform with Fergus Coyle, who's a fantastic photographer that we collaborate with. He actually just won a big portrait award this week. And he did a photojournalist essay, so it's always about the storytelling. And I think that's something that's missing in a lot of cycling. It's something that actually, and again, I've talked about not naming brands, but it's something that Rafa did and still does incredibly well. That investment in storytelling, the production, the kind of the rigor in the way that they stream all that together. They were the brand that invented that, and they're still exceptionally good at it.
Well, they didn't invent that; they just use it better than us.
Sure. Well, it's certainly in the cycling space. They other brands, and it's a long-standing way of building a brand and doing that. But certainly in the cycling space, they were very and continue to be very important in the work they do there. So yeah, I think to answer your question, the art isn't just about the visuals. It's really about, and also it's not just always going to be artists. That's something else I should probably hint at. The plan is to be, and again, coming back to that supreme mentality on the brand, collaborations could be anybody. It could be other brands. It could be an individual person, a well-known person, So the collaborations thing is not just the art that's in our DNA, it's the collaborative nature. And, when you mentioned earlier about how is that going to evolve 5-10 years down the line, it's something that I think will continue to be the center of what we do. And we are already doing our own designs, like our bib shorts. We do different versions and so on. And we have our own collections coming out soon as well, capsules with our own graphics to give people a different offering. But that collaborative thing is always going to be the kind of the hub of what we do.
Yeah, well, it's a great way to differentiate yourselves, and I think it allows for that, engage in a more meaningful and deeper way the people that want to ride bikes and feel more connected to the brand. Yes, true, the storytelling aspect of it is massive. You need to do that and execute that very well. You mentioned Rafa, great example. But taking it further than that, through how there's kind of this ecosystem, you're mentioning about the artist that creates this artwork for the brand, and then that whole story around what expands from that, the music that comes from that, the experience, the event that originates from that. That's all part of really stretching that the value that comes from that collaboration, rather than just being, we'll do a collaboration with this brand. It's a tick box, and we do it. We're going to merge these two audiences.
That's how it feels to me. Like when I look as a consumer, that's how those collaborations so often feel to me. It feels like a tick box. Someone's going, "Oh, this would be a good idea," or "I know someone at this brand. Let's do this thing together." And I have a mantra that's like first and foremost of everything that we do, right? And I think it all comes back to my obsession with efficiency. Always trying to kind of refine everything and make it the most efficient possible. But the mantra generally is, on the product side, it came from the product side. If we don't believe we can measurably improve it, we don't make it. So we don't make socks. What would be an obvious margin maker to do with our limited artist batch editions would be socks, right? We don't make them because socks has been solved as far as I'm concerned, right? So, but I've over time extended that to being that we don't do things unless it matters. So I'm not going to send an email, do a social media update. You look at our Instagram, I don't post on it anywhere near as much as most brands, because what's the point? I've not got anything to say right now, like save your communications and they're more powerful. The reason we've got a 74% open rate on our emails is because we're not bombarding people with unnecessary, irrelevant content and offers and discounts and fluff. So the overriding mantra for me with everything that Kostüme does it matter? If it doesn't, then we don't do it.
Very good. Yeah, I mean, that's decluttering. It's especially in the day and age that we live in. I think it's just going to resonate with more and more people, because you are bombarded with from all sides. If you have something that is meaningful, that comes in quantities and in over the years, it's always very sporadic. It makes it more valuable, I think. I wanted to really, there is an interesting point that's kind of the intersection, in the intersection of being an entrepreneur, founder-led, building a founder-led brand. I think like a lot of freelancers, a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with this, which is you have challenges. Every day you face a new challenge. What for you has been one of the most unexpected challenges that you have faced so far? Like, I think building on from that, like, how do you manage the highs and lows? Because you are in it for the long game, but not every day will be a high. not every other day, like, yes, I've done that, I smashed those KPIs. How do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very relevant question. I was very ill over Christmas, and I think it was just because I'd just done too much in the last sort of third of last year and basically burnt out. It's a horrible feeling. And it's something that I think unless you've been, I try not to mythologize being a founder too much, because I think there are other people out there that's their shtick, right? That's their big thing. Yeah. It's like being a founder is so difficult and so hard and everything. Yes, it is. It's really, I do not recommend it to anyone. If you're, got any sense, don't have children and don't be a founder. Certainly don't have a child and time as being a founder like I did. But I jest. They're both incredible things to do, and you should absolutely do those things, right? Like, don't work for people. If you have a passion, anyone can solve any problem if they put their mind to it, apart from maybe, biomechanics or space travel or whatever. Yeah. Within reason, I have a genuine belief that like all of these great businesses started with a person with an idea and some dedication and some rigor and some grit. And so I think anything's possible. Last year, the first part of last year, I was feeling very lonely and very, as a sole founder, especially with no one to bounce off, it was all in my head and like I could see the results and I knew what I needed to do, but being bootstrapped is also very, very hard, looking at the kind of market and everything. And the founder of another pre-order brand who are a little bit ahead of us, not in cycling actually, it's a like menswear brand. I had a couple of chats with him, and he'd really suffered in the past with burnout and with mental health and everything. And he said to me, you need to share. You need to get out there and talk to people. Don't just sit behind your desk. Don't just, do the thing. Talk to other founders. And so last year, I actually joined the NatWest Accelerator. It's funny because like, obviously this is my 25th year as a founder, and I've raised a lot of venture capital in the past and been very successful and grown these business and brands, whatever, this isn't my first go around. So yeah, I sort of felt a little bit like it might be a bit beneath me. So, I'm happy to admit to these kind of things because, it's not a bad thing, but I thought, this is going to be, I've already done all this stuff and there's nothing they can really teach me. But honestly, it was so useful, and also using LinkedIn a lot more as well to kind of supplement that and getting much more involved in it, and rather than just sort of dilly-dallying around the edges. And again, I've had some fantastic dialogues and made some great contacts there and met some people in real life through it. But having that network where people that are sharing similar problems, because only another founder can really understand what you're going through. Having those same, it's just different to being stressed about your job, and not better or worse. And again, coming back to this thing of about not being demeaning about what anyone else is doing, but it is different. And especially in the early stages of a business where you're wearing every hat. I'm answering the customer emails. I'm trying to secure the investment. I'm designing the next products. I'm thinking about the marketing and doing literally doing everything. And there's no other thing that you do where you wear all those hats and you have to be good at them all. And holding all that information in your brain at one time is just like, it's a real challenge. So yeah, unfortunately, I'd love to say to you, riding my bike was the big help. But actually, I barely rode my bike last year. The irony of running a cycling brand, and it just felt a little bit too much like work last year. It just really, I was so in the thick of it. And so, yeah, it was actually finding like-minded people to go and share.
Sharing the story.
Yeah, and that's still a part of that network. And I'm not as engaged with it as I was, but it was hugely valuable. And so I think that's a lesson, whatever you're doing and whatever your problems are, I also see a therapist every week, and I have done for quite a long time. Being able to just have a safe space where you can just talk about everything you're going through, that's a massive help, regardless of whether it's business or life, whatever it is. I wholeheartedly recommend that to anyone and everyone if you have the means to do that. It's really important. This year, it's get back on the bike. That's the because it's just ridiculous to be doing what I'm doing and not finding time to cycle. So I've already been out a few times this year. It's just getting over this hideous flu. So I'm terribly unfit, but I've actually got back on the mountain bike rather than the road bike initially, just rediscovering the fun and the creativity and, all those great things. And I plan to get back on the road bike pretty soon. I'm not sure I'll be busting out 300k Audaxes for a little while, but yeah.
You're starting. That's
it. Exactly. Consistency.
I mean, with these lessons that you have learned along the way, you just mentioned about sharing your story, going to NatWest Accelerator program for startups. I mean, and you mentioned as well being a founder. This is not your first rodeo. You've done it in many with different companies, with different brands in the past. But I mean, there is always lessons you can learn, and I'm kind of intrigued to find out if there is one thing that you can think of, or one lesson that you learned from this process of starting Kostüme that you wish you had known at the start. What would it be?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because you learn something. I find I learn something every day. It's pretty amazing, and that's also why I love doing this. Why I love being a founder. It's like you're not stuck in one role, so you're constantly learning things. I know I never thought I'd ever need to know all of the import duty codes for different products in different countries. Stuff like that. So yeah, there's that. I think there's probably two things that stand out. One is the assumption that people would care about it. And actually, I'm not even so much talking about consumers, but you're the first person I've spoken to on a podcast or anything. And that's not ego talking. Like, I don't think people are going to go, oh, it's Ed Bartlett, we should interview him. He's got some good stories. But what we're doing is a solution to a massive problem in the industry. And we've proven the traction and the model. We've got breakout results that are like pretty unprecedented in many different ways. You're the only person that's come and said, Ed, let's do a podcast or let's talk about it. And it's not that I'm not connected to these other people, so this comes back to my point about people seem to only want to talk about the bad news recently. And like, I've just gotten obsessed with just all the bad stories. It's like, I don't know why you would want to do that, because there are fantastic stories out there, success stories, personal, individual stories, and so on, athletes and whatever it is. So that's been one of the things things I've done previously, people have wanted to talk. So in the games industry, like I was the person that pioneered putting brands into video games, and the incoming interest from BBC, Guardian, talking at these big, I've got bags full of speaker passes from conferences, for like Guardian Media Conference and big investor conferences and International Herald Tribune, Wired, all these pages and pages of it incoming. And I assumed that would probably happen with this, because we're solving a big problem in an exciting space. It's got much broader potential in the broader fashion world, the pollution, all these other aspects, And so, yeah, I thought people would be more interested and care more, which is obviously great. We're having this chat now. It's fantastic. It's good to be able to share. I actually don't mind the fact that we've been under the radar a bit, if I'm honest, because it's allowed us to really prove what we're doing in a much deeper way. And we have these absolutely third-party verified stats, whether it's the Trustpilot, whether it's like the CrowdCube campaign. We have to pre-evidence every claim we make. These aren't just me saying these things. When you read that pitch, it's like all of those claims have been third-party verified. So I don't know if people just maybe need to see it get further down the line, so it's more real or whatever, but I just felt like more people would be interested and would care about the solution, take the brand out of it. The other learning would probably be fulfillment. I mean, like, I never knew how difficult like global fulfillment was, and I'm looking forward very soon to be handing it off to people. But like that whole world, it's like you wouldn't pay someone to come and fit new windows and then they lose the windows on the way, and that's okay. But that's how fulfillment seems to work. It's like just no big deal. These products go missing, and that's just how it is. And you may or may not get you. It's just great. It's just a bit like the Wild West to me. So yeah, I think that's been something that I would probably have outsourced earlier on. I've spent an awful lot of time on the fulfillment front. That's like wasted time essentially. So I think because I always like to really deeply understand each part of the business, I like to get my hands dirty with it and do it. But that's probably one area where I didn't really need to get that involved, and it's cost me a lot of time. Actually, there's one more if we've got time for it.
Sure.
The investment side of things, right? Again, I think there's an understanding in that if you're a founder and you've raised money and you're in that startup ecosystem, which is a real ecosystem, a lot of the same people, and everyone sort of knows about each other. And there's a sort of unspoken understanding of like, if you're a business in this space with this potential market size, with a solution to a real problem that's scalable, and you have this traction, you're going to be able to raise money, right?
Okay.
It may not be from the exact person you want or on the exact terms you want, but that's going to be possible. That's not been the case in the last 18 months, and so it's always interesting when you have a kind of 20 plus year understanding of an ecosystem and suddenly it stops functioning in the way you expect it to. And so that's been an interesting one. And again, I probably have wasted quite a lot of time on the investment front that, I should have done the crowd thing a lot earlier, for example, because it fits with the model, it fits with what we're doing, the community aspect, engage consumers, and, the being able to kind of get people more involved in the brand and all those things. But because my past experience has always been more in the kind of angel investor and VC things, that was just my natural direction to go in. It was the easy door to push. But in the end, actually, it turns out that perhaps that ecosystem is changing and isn't going to work in that way anymore. And it's turned out for the best, because actually bootstrapping this growth this year, although it's been really hard, ultimately has been far and away the better thing to do.
Interesting.
And it means that growth that's on the table that we would have had is still there on the table for this year, and we're going to have the resources now to be able to kind of achieve those things that we wanted to do. And we're not going to suddenly post-investment become this free spending, throw money at problems and everything, because that's just not how I'm built. But it will allow us to do things that will make the business more stable and sustainable. And
of course,
that's the crux really for any founder. I think.
Very good. I have to ask this question because you have sharing about the challenges of sharing about the growth, sharing about how do you see the business going in the future. But on a personal side, what does success look like to you?
That is something that I think has changed dramatically over the 25 years. And it's a real cliche, but the older you get, and when you have children, I think that kind of future of the planet thing is something that I feel very visceral. I haven't flown now for probably 8 years. I only really buy clothes from another pre-order brand. Actually, I probably should name check them. The brand that gave me the concept behind Kostüme originally is a brand called, and I have no involvement with them. I don't know them. I'm not affiliated anyway.
Right.
Their products are fantastic and their model is fantastic. A brand called Gustin, Gustin. Okay. So his problem that he was solving was selvage denim. So he was a real selvage denim passionate about, but people weren't making it in the right way and poor quality. So the short version is he went around to all the factories that make the fabrics, bought the dead stock, sold it on a pre-order basis. He's then built this brand from one pair of jeans to now having hundreds of products, all ethically made. He's brought a lot of manufacturing back into America, which had lost a lot of that. He's never taken a penny in investment. He's never spent a penny on ads or performance marketing. It's all been word of mouth, refer a friend. Right. So he's my sort of shining star, what they've done. And I think it's that thing of making a difference, right? So success to me is in some way making a difference to somebody. And I would love that to be the bigger difference of we'd end up driving systemic change and become the next Patagonia and really drive circularity. Because let's face it, even Patagonia still has waste and still on the same business model. They still discount. They do some great things as well, but they're far from perfect. And so for me, it's like, am I able to kind of, even if I change one new person, the next raffle or the next Pas Normal or the next costume, even if I change their approach, that makes a difference. If I make one brand consider existing brand, change their way slightly and think about using this model or think about stopping the overproduction or taking, women cycling more seriously or changing their product ethos or whatever. Or if it's just changing one rider's life, so there's a woman that we supported recently, actually on the cover of the new Audax magazine called Jess Golding, and she just couldn't find a pair of bibs that worked for her, right? Her whole journey was basically trying to find these. Wanted to do longer distances, couldn't find shorts that work. I gave her a pair in return for writing us a piece of content, and now she did the North Cape 4000 recently. So as someone creating a product like that, you can really help people. If I can help someone get out the door and ride their bike, so yeah, success to me is knowing that I'm doing something that is making a positive difference somewhere to someone.
Very good. Very good. I mean, it's easier said than done.
Absolutely.
Easier said than done.
For sure.
So we came to this point in the podcast where I started a tradition where every guest leaves a question to my next guest, not knowing who they are. So the question that was left for you is the following. What are you doing that's connecting people to ride bikes together?
Yeah, that's a good one. Community is super important, and the majority of research that I've done with our customers and in cycling generally, the majority of people ride their bike on their own. solo, which is fascinating. I prefer to ride my bike on my own. Even when I do Audaxes, I'll ride a little bit with some people, but I'll generally drop back and then enjoy it, at my own pace and in my head and doing things. But there's a huge element to the power of kind of community and cycling as well. So one of the things that I've done that's like a real positive step is supporting some clubs.
Yeah.
So we don't do custom kit as a kind of general offering.
Yeah.
Because just not where we're at. It's not the problem I'm trying to solve right now. However, I have supported a couple of clubs with kit. So Audax Club Bristol being one of them. They're very sort of, I came from Audax Club Bristol. That's where I, discovered Audax. That's where Kostüme was developed in my head, riding all their great events and everything. But, their ethos and their sort of openness and the kind of, a lot of women there. There's a lot of older people. There's, it's a real all walks of life. And so, I support them with kit. And obviously our kit is quite focused on utility and long distance. That's where a lot of the product features come from. And then I've also just recently supported a club called Newtown Park, who actually I'm about to do a podcast this Monday with the founders of Newtown Park. So they're very much a sort of very open, there's a lot of women that ride with them, LGBTQ plus, people of color. It's like how you would hope a modern cycling club to be. And they do these great rides. They really go out and explore and push boundaries, but then they go to the pub and have pizza and beer, and people go on holidays together. I think there's been a couple of romances, and it's like a real, to me, like the perfect example of what a modern cycling club can be. And that's sort of where we want to align it. So I have done those things. Moving forwards, again, having not had the time and the budget to be able to kind of really do the things I want to do, that community aspect is going to become important in terms of what we're doing with events, activations and so on. So it's something I'm going to push a lot more. And even through the storytelling, I think like encouraging people to, the recent podcast that we did with the launch of the Can Do platform, a lot of that was about being this guy Tom, riding on his own for mental health and everything, but then starting to then discover these other worlds like Audax and bikepacking, and then taking people from that community to share his little special space when he goes bikepacking and having those adventures and what that means. So, I think it's putting the possibilities out there instead of it just being about this over aspiration. It's about what are these micro adventures about? What does it mean to kind of go and ride with a club? Because it can feel very hard to take that step and meet new people. And what if I'm not fast enough? For sure. Demystifying it and making it feel normal, basically, I think. Watch this space. There's going to be a lot more stuff coming up in the next 12 months along those lines.
Very good. Very good. Thanks for sharing. I wanted to open now the possibility for you to leave a question to my next guest. What question would you like to leave?
I think the one that really comes to mind a lot is how do we try to fix the issue with use of the road with other car drivers, especially. I think there's been a real polarization of that topic in recent years, post-COVID. COVID times we had the roads to ourselves pretty much, and it was amazing. We go and ride. Since COVID, I have personally seen the quality of driving rapidly diminish. I don't know if it's because we didn't drive for a long time. I don't know if it's because we've become more insular and selfish. I don't know what it is, but I can definitely see a big reduction in driving standards since COVID. And I don't know if any research has been done about the percentage of accidents before and after or anything, but I've witnessed it with my own eyes, and I really notice it now, even when I'm driving a car, not just as a cyclist. But I've definitely really seen a significant polarization of car drivers' attitudes in cycling. And a lot of that's also the press, right? Like in the UK, the tabloid press.
Exactly. The media, the politicization of the scars.
Yeah. So I've got some initiatives that I'm thinking of with Kostüme already about how we can kind of try to drive that narrative a bit. But I do also sometimes see with some cyclists that they exacerbate the problem because it's hard not to have a visceral reaction when your physical life being threatened, right? But I think there's definitely a way that we need to think about it. So I'd be interested to see what the next guest, what their thoughts are on how do we diffuse that tension and educate, because most of us are also car drivers.
Of course, yeah.
So and I guess a side question that how do we get more of those people out of their cars and onto a bike?
So a two-part question. That's a great question you can have a whole podcast on that question alone. Brilliant. Ed, it's been amazing to hear about how your life experience has led you to where you are now with Kostüme and the purpose that you have. And I think I have a deeper understanding of Kostüme, a deeper respect for what the work you have been doing. And I think it will resonate with people. So thanks for taking the time and sharing the purpose.
Thanks for asking me. As I say, it's there's no ego involved at all. It's I'm happy to come on these things and I'm happy to not. So thank you for asking me, because it's great to be able to kind of share it more, and makes it feel more real in a weird kind of way, even though we're doing it and it's it is what it is. But having these kinds of conversations, it does help to kind of clarify what you're doing and crystallize your thoughts. So thank you for the invite.
That wraps up our conversation with Ed Bartlett, the visionary founder of Kostüme. Ed's journey reminds us that success isn't about following the easy path, it's about doing the right things. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out Kostüme's incredible work and follow their journey towards transforming cycling apparel. And don't forget to subscribe to Ride to Success for more inspiring stories from the cycling world and beyond. Until next time, keep riding, keep innovating, and keep pushing towards your own success. Thanks for listening.